episode 219 of View from 202. 4 of us are here, Brit, Cork, Peaches, and Sam. And it's a busy week in Red Bulls land, because I can't remember the last time we did 2 episodes in 1 week. Probably since a CCL run or playoffs or something.
It's a little bit of an emergency situation that we kind of reacted to. Yeah.
Does this team really deserve 2 episodes this week?
I think they've earned 2 episodes this week.
Let's put it like that.
Also, a bit of odd timing because, disgusting, as Joe Buck would say, a disgusting act has taken place. A regular season game has been scheduled on a Tuesday.
Because the big game is tomorrow.
Yeah. So we're in the wake of a pretty crushing loss in the semifinal against Orlando City FC. Really pretty crushing 45 minutes against Orlando City.
Something not very chill happened on Wednesday night.
Not chill at all. Yeah. And it's also been quite a deflating 3 weeks for the New York Red Bulls faithful. I'm going to blame it on my lack of concentration just from the dog barking last episode, because last episode I kind of introduced this match with a rambling, weird, incoherent thing saying, like, I don't know, this doesn't really feel like a crucible or something. And boy, was that off base, because in hindsight, obviously, the last three matches, actually, I should say, have been massive in terms of changing the tone and trajectory. Well, I don't know. Too early to say trajectory. That's a bit projecting. But it's changed the tone and outlook of this season, I will say. And those 3 matches, of course, were the derby loss at home against NYCFC, the win with a heavily rotated squad in Austin, and this 5-1 defeat to Orlando City SC in the semifinal.
Yeah, weirdly enough, despite being the Brazilian club, their soccer club. But
yeah. And a little kicker is that Sacramento Republic, of course, beat SKC in penalties, so. But of course, if we had won, they wouldn't have done that,
Right.
That's how it goes.
I mean, just to kind of fly off from that too. I mean, there's always a 50-50 roughly chance that we were not going to advance, that we were not going to make this final. But the fashion in which it happened, I don't think anybody really saw coming.
Definitely. And I will say that to tip my hand even more than I have so far about how I feel about this, our episode after the derby loss was titled Down Bad, and I humbly suggest a working title for this of Too Bad. Too down, too bad for this one. So then it's opening up for a franchise, going forward.
The bad series?
Yeah.
The bad franchise.
So I think this episode, has lined up to be a little bit of a debrief of not only this match, but I think sort of a temperature check. And then I think we did solicit some questions on Twitter and that we can tee up at the end of the episode as well. But to start, so per usual, Cork has written a pretty good column breaking down
rubbish
the match. And this one I liked a lot, in particular because I think it kind of focused and analyzed this game sort of in the context of a couple different threads we've been spotting throughout the season that have gone wrong for the Red Bulls. So, Cork, in this, you picked out 3 trends, I think. If we can go into that, I don't know, what can we go through these 3 things that we picked out for the Red Bulls that seem to be persistent troubles for the team and for Gerhard Struber, and how did they pop up in this match against Orlando on Wednesday?
Well, I mean, I kind of started it off with, I guess, the most kind of value-neutral sort of objective observation of the column, which is that the team continues to have issues with not necessarily defending set pieces, but defending the second balls or the second phase after a set piece. The most notable example from earlier in the year where it was happening a little bit too often for comfort was when the team dropped the game against Minnesota through the Amarilla goal. that came where, a free kick was cleared out of the box, and then Minnesota, while we were still getting our lines reorganizing again, just, threw a random cross in there that he got on the end of. And then last week in Austin, the first goal that we gave up was kind of a, pretty precise example of that, where Driussi just picked up a ball out of the air, nobody really closing him down too hard, and he just puts it in. And then this game against Orlando, the two different goals scored by Cesar Arujo for Orlando were just him slamming home a ball that had bounced to him off of a set piece clearance, a weak set piece clearance, that, again, nobody really closing it down, team not kind of organized and awake, and can just smash it home. And, in isolation, those plays happen sometimes, but it's happened enough now over the course of the season and in the last couple of weeks that you have to kind of point to it as some type of symptom.
And I apologize, but I feel like I have to add as well, Jacob Glezning's goal, or Jakob Glezning's goal in Philadelphia. Similar, it's the exact circumstance, a header that drops and then we don't close down the second ball. Granted, that's a hell of a volley that he had to hit for it to go in, but same part on the pitch. And it's baffling because unlike, well, maybe not baffling, but it's interesting because unlike previous poor stretches that this team's had, like in 2019, for instance, it doesn't seem to be that we're like poorly drilled A to Z, all the way up down the pitch. Like we are executing our own set pieces fairly decently. We're not, missing and just hitting the wrong pass or hitting to the wrong foot like we were in some of the real COVID stretch where I think training was just disrupted really heavily. We're doing some small things quite well. And if, in fact, like the first half of this game, we were as rampant as we've been all season. You could also say that for the first 20, 30 minutes of the City game, of course. It's another recurring pattern of sorts.
Yeah, a trend as well.
It's not that this team is poorly drilled from head to toe. But this is popping up. I guess I'm wondering, like, do you think that there might be an aspect of like a tactical trade-off where we're maybe the focus is so much on trying to apply selective pressure further up the pitch with like a front 3 or 4, and then we get caught in these situations where we're totally collapsed back into like a low block and aren't able to like focus and recover on these second balls. Like, is it a part of the tactical system, or is there room to be doing better even with that setup?
Well, as I kind of left off in the column, I mean, it's something that I haven't had the time, if I ever will, to sort of go through all of these goals and kind of put the microscope on it. Whether I'm qualified to make those judgments is in question as well. But you
don't have one of your many underlings at Once Metro just write that.
Well, I mean, I could always just shovel it over.
Send the research assistant
to one of the kids in the hall. Yeah, but the issues, like I said in the column, the issues with set pieces, you could maybe go a few different paths with what the diagnosis is. I do think we're maybe a little bit small of a team, which, that in kind of over the course of a season, whatever, there's going to be situations where the ball's going to, fall into a bad aerial matchup and the other team's going to put a goal in. And I think maybe us being shorter on average, sort of heightens that risk a little bit.
Do you say so? Are you saying that, like, because of our height, in a way, we're losing first balls in a way that causes second balls to be dangerous?
Well, I think it could, be both. I mean, I think it, could be all sides of the issue come from that. Because obviously we play with our two main center backs, Long and Nealis, are obviously tall. But whenever we're playing three in the back, it's usually kind of a shorter hybrid fullback like Edwards there. We don't really have tall forwards, or any of our midfielders are all particularly short in many cases. So
we had a tall forward.
well, yeah, but
He wasn't that good with his head in
No,
the air,
that's also
to
true.
be honest.
right, and and Klimala is not. Klimala actually has some good defensive moments, as we saw, especially in KC on set pieces. But yeah, is not necessarily a big dominant aerial presence, and I think that could be somewhere where you can point, where it's just law of averages with us getting caught sometimes in those situations. But on the other hand, yeah, it could just be an issue with just not being drilled, or just it not being as emphasized, that phase of play not being as emphasized as other things are in training, and it could just be one of the more. I already coined this awkward term last week, but playing Struber's advocate a little bit this episode. I'll be doing this, but I think it could be one of the more precise areas where having kind of a younger team, could catch up with you, and guys just not as sort of seasoned in those sorts of moments.
I find that implication so amusing still. The Struber's advocate.
Well, yeah. So
That's my favorite Kevin Grisham novel after the Roller. It's an interesting point. And that maybe that will tie into one of the later points I have on my mind as well. But you mentioned Klimala's defensive contribution, and then I thought what a flying game from him. So in the first half of this game, the bike attempt, I was not expecting him to thump it quite so hard and right off the bar. And then he had another shot that was, millimeters, I think, from deflecting going in.
Working it off his left foot from, outside the box with a guy in front of him.
And then ultimately getting the assist on the Lewis Morgan goal as well.
If this was a continental European goal with the steel that they used there, it would have bounced the right way, and instead of, just bouncing the wrong way.
Yeah, they're still using square goalposts in Florida.
Yeah, the goal, the alloy compound they have there is all wrong.
Right, everyone knows that they use a softer steel.
That's why the bridges all collapse.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, so I really running rampant, really picking up, I think, from the more fluidity that we had on Sunday, I think, as well. I thought Morgan, Klimala, Omir, and to a little bit lesser extent, Lucchinius. We're doing a really good job at executing what we recognize sort of as our base plan, and really winning balls in the midfield, suffocating Orlando's attack, and being extremely vertical. And I think it was characterized in the match, or you characterized in the match, as attacking in waves. And I really felt that as well. But it sounds like when asked at the halftime how Struber felt about that, right after admittedly conceding a frustrating goal to end the half, Struber didn't necessarily agree, right?
Yeah, it was kind of odd. Yeah, he did his interview with the TV crew, and they were kind of teeing it up like, oh man, pretty exciting half, huh? You guys, you had some good moments and stuff like that. And Struber was just very, mind you, I don't mind a coach being a little bit more serious and buttoned down in a cup, elimination ceremony or situation, in a big moment like that. But Struber was just very kind of dour, and then just kind of like he had already lost. It was almost like where he was just like, I'm very disappointed with the work against the ball, and that was bad. I don't know. I don't have a UEFA B or even C or D license. I'm not credentialed in this area, but
as an F license, let me tell you, that was shit.
All right. Well, but
excuse me, expired F license.
You don't know that I haven't renewed.
But I think whatever it's generated from, whatever type of play, type of moment that they're generated from. I don't know how you can see a half where your team is creating that much danger and that many chances. I mean, this isn't even being like a completely like Kevin Keegan, just completely attacking, no tactics, perspective. This is just purely pragmatic. Like, when your team's looking that good and looking that dangerous, I don't know how you could be as upset with it as he is. I mean, I think it's a situation where, like I said, it's fine to be serious and, really kind of, grounded in a cup final or a semifinal, sorry, but it didn't seem like a situation where the team needed to be dressed down. And it seemed like, even if maybe this is rare from Struber, I'm not in his locker room, but even if this is maybe rare from Struber, a moment to kind of build your team up and say, just keep going. I mean, that last goal was unlucky. Keep going with what you're doing now and we'll win. I mean, Orlando's going to get tired. They're not going to come back into this game physically the way we are. I mean, it seemed like such a strange moment to be so kind of, down about your team's performance. And I can't imagine that wasn't, carried over to the team itself in the locker room at that.
Right. Because how can you look at what you were doing and not and be told that and not think it's incongruent to what reality is, right? Like, you watch that first half and you're like, oh yeah, we did really well, and then you get told no, it was all shit, and then we're going to change everything.
I mean, it's not even like Orlando is really creating great chances in response. No more so than in a lot of games, especially away games this season. And they were kind of just like, they were kind of like Red Bull's chances in recent weeks, where they were just kind of like, all gets kind of stopped right in the shallow final third, and like Pato missed a few just kind of like, hopeful shots. And it's just like, I don't see how there was as much risk as he seems to have seen.
And the chances that we were generating were so dangerous, right? Not only that, but we could have scored 3 times if we weren't offside?
It could have easily. I mean, Klimala's chances alone could have been 2 or 3 if they went in the right way. And there are a few others. I mean, Luquinhas had some moments. I mean,
but it's like another example of like, what can you possibly live up to? Like, what is the expectation if you're doing that and like, you're told that it's a systematic problem and not just kind of an unlucky goal, then like what is it? Like what are the expectations?
Well, it seems like he's not even saying it's a systematic problem, because I guess the thing that, I mean, as we've said, I was not in the locker room. We can only imagine what was said. But 2 years into this project, year and a half into this project, this is at this sort of point where we should at least be at the point where he can walk in the locker room and say, guys, like, we understand what we did wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and like trust his players to analyze the situation, or like, just be at a position where like we've gone over film together, like we've conceded goals before, we've talked about it, like we know what we did wrong and we're going to improve. Like, there should be some level of that like trust and like communication with the team, but like it for him, and it might just be how he's choosing to communicate outwards to the public. I don't know, but you get much more the sense that whenever there's a mistake happening, he feels compelled to break it down and like explain to his players and everyone, like as though it's the first time making their mistake, explaining from the ground up of like, oh, you screwed up this press trigger, you really need to do this, like, well, I think it's just shoddy coaching. Again, speculative. I'm not there to see him saying this, but like this is the impression I get from the repeated pattern of comments and how he's talking about it. Maybe he doesn't even intend it this way, and this is just kind of what's happening. But it doesn't seem like he has a sort of shared understanding or basis or floor with the players on the field, understanding what we're trying to do and what goes wrong. It seems like he always feels compelled that he has to explain the fundamentals of everything every single time.
And I guess that segues into the sort of big bomb of the night, where Lewis Morgan was subbed off in what appeared to be just another kind of innocuous early Struber sub. as we've kind of commented on the show recently and through the year, that he's pretty trigger happy with substitutions, and it sometimes causes the team to lose a little bit of its cohesion. But he turned out after the game, and strangely enough, it was a question that was at the very end of it was garbage time of the press conference, after all the main topics have been covered, and it was just kind of a throwaway question to him at the end because Morgan had scored, and just being like, what did you think of Lewis Morgan's goal? He's your leading scorer this year. How proud of you are him? Da da da. And Struber literally kind of like clenched his fist in front of his face for like 10 or 15 seconds, and then took a deep breath, and you saw the quotes the other night. Basically said, you can't just rely on having big talent. You have to leave everything on the field. The work against the ball, sucked more or less, and coming out and pretty explicitly saying that it was a kind of a punitive substitution, which opens up a real kind of Pandora's box of questions as far as, is that something that you do in a semifinal with one of your best players? Is that the correct way to handle that kind of situation at all with one of your more experienced professionals, a year and a half into your coaching tenure? Or, we're kind of Brit was saying, for, Morgan is, like we said, kind of the most explicit one so far, but reading between the lines, Struber's whole tenure, but particularly this season, it's gotten stranger because it's his second year. It's now been 2 years, which, especially these days, is an eternity in soccer for coaches to be expected to kind of install their system and their principles. And it still seems like several, if not the majority of the teams, objectively highest quality players, and also, just kind of on paper, they're highest paid in many places, just don't seem to be grasping what Struber's going for, 2 years into it. Again, if it was just all of a sudden that Morgan is the first guy he's ever showed up with a sub, it, wouldn't be as much of an issue. But the fact that we've now seen Drew Yearwood, who, was, kind of emotional when he was talking about being benched for most of the summer when he was the player of the match in Austin post game. And then, several guys who, again, reading between the lines, or sometimes not even having to read between the lines, going through the list. Drew Yearwood and Frankie Amaya last year. Klimala's had his little runs on the bench this season. Caden Clark hasn't been able to sniff minutes.
Cameron Harper early.
Cameron Harper showed up in Struber's first few months. Which
was a more, low. It feels like a lower stakes one, just because he's gotten less minutes. But it's still it was one of his early appearances early on to Struber's tenure, and he subbed him in, and then felt the need to sub him out. I'm pretty sure we weren't winning the game at the time.
No,
so
we were. Yeah.
He burnt a second sub to sort of humiliate Harper early on, and. Look, was he playing great in that game? No. Was he an active liability for us? No, I don't think so. So I think that's also a worthy inclusion in this group
absolutely.
Too. Yeah.
Which also, to my point, when that first happened, everybody, including us, was pretty willing. Not entirely, but pretty willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. If you have your own principles, which I kind of do, that you shouldn't, show up a player, especially a young player like that, humiliate, like Brit said. I just kind of on principle have issues with that personally, but in the grand scheme of things, nobody was acting like, it was a fireable offense, or like, Struber is a, bad guy for it or anything. It was just kind of like, that's kind of weird, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll see how,
we're not
Harper,
in training.
We'll see how Harper does for the rest of the year. And then it turns out, this season, Harper's all of a sudden a useful player. And again, it's like, and there's, when the discourse was happening online about a lot of this, some of the the pushback was that, lot of these players have come out better on the other end of it, which that depends on you thinking that they were shit before, which is, not consensus.
This is true. I retract my back
us.
to tank theory from a few episodes ago. That no longer.
Yeah. But no, I mean, to my point, I mean, kind of the idea that Yearwood or Amaya or Klimala or whoever. I mean, remember Frankie Amaya was scoring and like assisting in the early parts of last season before he got banished. I mean, it's not. I mean, the idea that these guys were just completely hopeless and in the weeds until Struber banished them to Montclair for months on end is, a little bit faulty. And then, again, like I said, the fact that it's still happening almost 2 years into his tenure with many guys who have been here for the whole ride, it just continues. The more it happens and the longer it happens, you can't just say that the players are all we just happen to have a bunch of lazy, uncoachable players, because I don't think that's the case. Both from our own vantage through club media, what have you, on their personalities and stuff like that, and also just what we've seen from them on the field. I don't see how you could see, or how you could think that the common denominator is just all the players happen to suck.
That's just not how a team works too, whether you're an athletic team or you're pushing paper in some office as well. Like a club culture, a team culture is a component of a lot of people there, but significant part of that culture is management, and the people who are in charge of disciplining and have the power to discipline and assign work to people is an extremely relevant part of it. It's not just like coming like an inherent characteristic of everybody that can't be changed,
Yeah, I mean, especially because you were talking about like having trust in your players and all of that. There's this kind of like logical bridge that I don't necessarily see, where it's like, like the way you watch how a game is happening, clearly like Struber doesn't necessarily trust all of his players, and to him, like because of that, like he also doesn't trust his players to right whatever wrongs that he sees, so he tries to swap them out in kind of like dramatic ways over the course of a game. Which leads to me, it's like, then you think that you're the sole person responsible for the decision making, and like our big complaint constantly has been like, where is the accountability for the coaching? Like there's so many things that we're trying to attribute to, like if you're saying that these players are having issues staying motivated, I don't know, that's part of a coaching job, right? If you're saying that they're not really like tactically understanding or like tactically following what you're doing, like you're not instructing them in a way where they're being put to succeed. It's constantly like, we say this over and over again, but like our players are not being put into positions to succeed, and then are getting torn down for it, where the job of a coach is to necessarily do that, make our players look good. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to do, instead of just constantly tearing them down? So there's like this disconnect of like, clearly you don't trust them, you trust yourself to make these decisions, and yet the buck stops with the players and not you.
Right. And it's like, when is now for Gerhard Struber? It seems to always be about 6 months from now, once he gets everything, and I think there's a lot good in the last couple of comments, so I want to pause and unpack it, because I think there are two points that we're pulling from Cork's column here that I think are both separate but related points. Which one is that it's like a repeat of something we've said in previous episodes, which is the wholesale changes and really big use of subs early in the game that causes us to lose cohesion. And then the third point is sort of what we've been talking about with Lewis Morgan, and kind of the pattern of saying basically everyone on the squad apparently is just not getting it and is too lazy and can't be helped. Because it reminds me of like sort of the caveat you said earlier about, maybe this team is a little young, because I think one aspect that I also kind of am willing to throw a line to Struber on a bit is that, there's one thing he seems to be missing on the squad that I think a lot of successful managers have, which is like some sort of trusted player on the pitch, some sort of captain-like figure, but doesn't have to be literally who they like can have a back and forth with, who they trust to give like a temperature read, just sort of on the tactics, or just sort of on the how intense the game is going and what they see on the field. Struber plainly does not seem to have that. He doesn't seem like, as we've commented in different episodes, he seems to always be hounding his players. He does. Sometimes when he subs them off, he'll do the big ostentatious sort of like hand slaps and stuff. But it doesn't seem to me that he has like a trusted partner, or someone on the field that he kind of asks or
like
checks
a player
with.
coach.
Yeah, like a player coach type thing. Because I think one comparison that, is it fair? No. Is it what Struber, I think, would aspire to? Yes. One comparison, I think, is Jose Mourinho, whereas that is a manager who's extremely demanding. Yes, he does have a reputation of sort of wearing out his squad or anything, but he gets results. He's won a shitload of trophies, and he definitely is the kind of guy that instills this kind of system and builds up his guys. But the difference is, every club that Mourinho's gone into, you always hear he walks in the door and he finds a couple of his guys and he sits down and he's like, you are my captain, like you are my warrior. We're gonna like go fucking run through walls together. And whenever he leaves the club, even if it's in a bad situation where like, Marca is calling for him to be executed by the Spanish army, he usually has a player or two saying like that they wept for a day after he left, and then he misses them every day because he just like that's like the best football relationship or one of the relationships they've had in their lives. Is this an extreme example? Yes. Can we, divide by half or 3 or 4 to like think of something that would be good on our scale? Yeah, I think we can. I think we can also look at what made the 15 through 18 squads good with Jesse Marsch and kind of his habit of finding guys and really building them up. And of course, infamously, he would, we traded a couple guys in that span, but I think that goes to prove the point that Jesse was always able to find a new guy that he could build up and build his team around and trust. I think we lost a lot of that when Jesse left, and I think even before in that era, before Jesse, Mike Pecky has shown that he has a lot of limitations as a coach and as a person, but at least in 2014, he was able to recognize when he sort of had lost a grasp on the situation tactically, even just a little bit in the locker room, and sort of defer to Fraser, Henry, and Louis Ndula to kind of steer the ship. Now, if you can imagine Gerhard Struber flexing any sort of that like intuition or emotional intelligence, like, I'm impressed. I can't really imagine that happening right now. It seems to be a situation where, we're just constantly told that it's impossible for him to work in this situation. And this leads me to a final point that I think we've mentioned on this show a lot, which is the question and the concept of like the person who is in charge of hiring and firing the manager at Red Bull New York, right?
Could I just add one more thing to your point? I think it's additive because our current captain did not play last year.
Aaron Long?
Yeah,
this is true.
So, there is like he hasn't had time to even develop kind of like that on-stream or like on-field leadership chemistry even really with Gerhard Struber as a leader.
Yeah, and I will just say I'll say again, Struber's advocate, that there have been a couple comments from players that over the last 2 years that they do have, or that Struber does kind of hold sort of powwows and just kind of team conferences where everybody sort of lets out whatever they have to say and stuff like that. And, and it can be about tactics and stuff like that. But even that, I feel like there might be a little bit of a situation where, in a game situation, that clutters Struber's thinking even more and makes him even more kind of erratic about how he sees the game shaping out. And B, also might give him a little confidence that like, yeah, as long as he, talks with the players, sometimes he can sort of show them up whenever he feels like on the other end too. Either way, yeah, it just seems like a situation that is far from seamless. Again, two years into Struber's tenure, it's the longest tenure he's ever had at any club ever. As we've mentioned, and is somewhat of an eternity in football these days. Good coaches and bad coaches are often on the move after 2 or 3 years at a club. I mean, that is pretty fair baseline to have everybody on the same page with what you're doing. And the fact that that doesn't seem to be the case 2 years in is, no matter how much personnel has changed in the squad or whatnot. I mean, most of that personnel change happened when Struber first came in. I mean, he had basically a whole new squad bought for him last year. And, it's, again, that's, as Struber himself would say, that's football, that you have new guys who you have to install, all the time and stuff like that. And even with that being the case, like we've said, a lot of these guys getting sort of put in the doghouse are some of the players who have been here the entire time, some of the older players in the squad who are on the end of this treatment. So just, not good vibes. Even as much as we keep, adding the caveat that we are not in the locker room ourselves.
Yeah. So. One aspect that I also forgot to mention was that there have been the trickle of rumors over the last 2 seasons, really 2 that I can remember, when we were interested in like slightly older Austrian guys, like, that maybe could have filled the role that Struber wanted of like a trusted hand to be an older hand in the squad. Actually, that Junojevic guy, I thought at the time last year, I thought that made a lot of sense as sort of like a pretty low risk loan to add into the squad. Why not? And then there's this Jürgen Heil guy that I think was rumored this year. Baumgartner. And then he also had that history at Barnsley of like, kind of wanting to bring in some Austrian guys that he knew into his squad. The part I'm skeptical though is that I'm skeptical that bringing in guys that already is a foolproof or a sound idea of like building that sort of trust or camaraderie into the squad. I think a really important part of it is, meeting the squad you have and finding and striking trust among the players. I think it is a different game state, but I've been reminded this week of, the famous Jesse Marsh halftime speech of saying, this is the difference between 4-0 and 3-3 during that halftime game against NYCFC, and just reminding guys about the thin margins that exist in this sport, and that aspect of trying to build up guys and just develop confidence and trust in a young squad it doesn't seem to be here. It's really disappointing. Let's
imagine that he did a little bit more of, because now that Jesse speech is in my mind. And again, if you haven't seen it, it's the 2018 Cinco de Mayo derby that we won, where in the all access video, Jesse just has this pretty incredible speech. But anyway, part of that speech is Jesse kind of getting on the players' asses a little bit. I mean, his comment is just like, body language has to be on point. We can't have guys just kind of slouching around. Just be focused. That's one of the differences. And he's, getting on them a little bit, even though they were ahead in the game. And let's just say Struber's, speech to the team was a little more of that tenor as compared to his television interview, where he was just kind of like frowning and just sort of, quiet and just kind of like mumbling, like just, I did not like any of that and stuff like that. Again, I just think for him to think that that's what people should hear, for him to make that the public statement on what's going on in the locker room is so strange to me. And it sounds, obviously it's a little self-serving. I mean, it's kind of the whole theme of some of the issues with Struber that we're fleshing out right now, is that he, kind of casts off, all the responsibility onto his players when things go badly. But for him to be practically crying out for help, saying like, things are not good, they don't get it, or whatever, we need to shape up or whatever. That's just such a strange kind of face to put on the team for the cameras, especially in, such a big game. And again, playing the advocate again, I mean, it's fine to be a little bit more serious in your attitude in a game like that, but just in any context, kind of talking like that to the public, especially after the first half that we did, is just such a strange kind of eyebrow raiser.
Also,
as
who are
it
you
did with me.
talking to? Like, are you talking to your team in that moment, really? Like,
Well, that's kind of the thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's his public statement on what's going on inside the team, and it's just such a strange one. 2 years into his tenure
it's
with
like-
the team and the form it was in that game, but also just the general form of the season where they're doing more or less fine.
Right. It's
like,
at odds with both the historical standards and performance of the club and the literal performance this year. Like I mean, I guess if I want to be, I'll be nice to him. He's selling himself short too.
Right.
Like, he's done a pretty good job in a lot of these matches. Like, as much as I hate some of his subs, some of these games he's made these adjustments and we've come back and played a lot better.
Right.
Like he set up the game against Orlando really well. He set up the game against City really well. He then just gets a little too clever or something. But then for him to like turn around and echo the sentiment of like, oh well, the club is just sort of shit. All 18 of the players I have to suit up every week all suck. I need to get like basically 18 new players. It's like that is just putting on my full on just supporter fan hat here. It's just like such loser energy. Like it just indulges the worst aspects of what people get out of sports now these days.
Right.
It's just like it really lends itself to the idea or to the conception of like watching soccer to like monitor the transfer rumors and stuff and like the FIFA grades that everyone has, rather than showing up to the match and feeling a little bit of exhilaration and joy out of what he can do with these players, because he has actually been able to produce some good moments with these players, and there have been moments where this side that he's coached has produced electric football, but he seems to find it more important to like drag it all down instead and maintain that doing any better is impossible. I guess Oscar Pereira had a better gaming chair. His controller is a little bit nicer, because as we look at Orlando's squad, obviously like who could like look at these riches, like, right? Like,
we're playing with the Mad Catz controller, and they're playing with the
actually
LED.
I logged my little brother was playing, was coaching the team for the last half. So, obviously it's
Please
not
don't
fair.
ban me.
Yeah. It's like, it feels like he's driving our, borrowing our car and driving it down the highway and then shifting, going from the top gear and shifting it into reverse and completely braking the fucking car in all directions and going, I don't know how you expect me to drive this. I need to have a supercar. Like, I need to have a Maserati. Like, this is ridiculous. I don't, like, you expect me to drive a normal car? That's like, of course I had to like make an insane move and total the car. I don't know why you'd expect me to not do that.
Yeah, and I guess this segues our conversation over to, obviously it's, naturally in the air that it's the transfer window and stuff like that. And Struber does, has repeated throughout this season that he thinks he needs new players. And transfer window's less than a week away from being finished, and there does not seem to be a single plume of smoke out there about a signing. And again, to repeat an argument that we've kind of levied on the show this year, or in, more precisely in recent weeks, that again, like I said earlier, Struber had basically an entire new squad cycled in for him last year by Thelwell, yes, and now he's supposedly, he wasn't satisfied with what Thelwell was doing last winter, and now has supposedly a new regime that's a better fit, and it doesn't seem like they're doing any better on this quest to get Struber the, precise tools he needs to play, perfect pressing scheme in zone 14B or whatnot. And then the other end of that too is that let's go ahead and grant him, okay, yeah, you do need to constantly have new signings. You do need to have the best players possible and for your scheme. Who is Struber to be kind of the authority on that. What is Struber's track record that shows he's worthy of that kind of trust and that level of kind of resources being used? It's not, I'd like, to use Brit's reference point. I mean, Mourinho has a tendency to demand players and throw fits when he doesn't get players he wants at his clubs, but also Jose Mourinho has won the European Cup at multiple clubs and has more trophies than anybody in the history of the game. I mean, Struber is a guy who, spent literally less than a year at two middling European clubs where he did not exactly set the world on fire. He didn't do badly, but the idea that he needs to have his every whim catered and that he can't just be expected to build his reputation by working with the players he has is just such a strange attitude to see cropping up constantly.
Especially when we've had someone like Jesse, who came here in 2015 and did his work and then still established this team to his image, but he earned it.
Right.
And there were plenty of players in Jesse's team who were from the previous administration, recruitment, whatever, who were not necessarily fits for the press or whatnot, but he made it work.
Yeah, Mike Grella and Sal Zizzo made for high pressing teams.
Right, exactly. I mean, Mike Grella was literally just a guy in training camp, just a trialist, not somebody who was recruited because of his, Y Scout profile showing unbelievable, pressing numbers in, the African U20 Cup or something.
And he was just a dude with sick techers, not like,
right.
He wasn't even like particularly fast or like,
Or if we want to bring it closer home with the comparisons instead of shooting for the moon with Mourinho, like I would much rather be like Seattle with Brian Schmetzer than Atlanta with their carousel or LA Galaxy with their carousel. Does Seattle have an expensive, shiny guy DP like Raul Ruidiaz? Yes, they do. But they also have a very competent, well-managed core of players and a well-trained system around lots of continuity that has earned the trust that they consistently perform and have a continuity and have institutional memory of what's going on that throughout basically the whole time they've been in MLS has put them at the top of the conference. Over the same period, the New York Red Bulls were the Eastern Conference version of that until 2019. We in Seattle were in the playoffs for the most amount. I mean, I guess we're still in playoffs for the most amount of years. But we were also consistently top of the conference. And if we did slip to seventh, we were in the Open Cup final and sort of the dark horse candidate. That we were neck and neck with that. Whereas if you want to like do signings first and then trust a manager to do it, like Atlanta, sometimes it works out where you have a manager like Martino who is coming in at the same time as these guys and is able to sort of become the kind of overshadow and do Darren Neal's job instead of him and like actually have a plan. But once he leaves, it's been a carousel of just randomly dropping money on guys because they're like been Pavlov's dog trained into thinking that's what they're supposed to do and getting applauded for it. And then just having this like bizarre fit of expensive players with managers who are in over their head on how they actually need to set up. In fact, in a lot of ways, Struber kind of reminds me of Frank de Boer, constantly complaining that no one's fit enough and just like doesn't get it.
Also, Frank de Boer constantly playing to the shape of your opponents instead of putting a system into place.
Yeah, and you can also have LA Galaxy, who like finally did get another MLS lifetime manager, but is still just assembling all of these expensive toys in one place without like pausing and building a core to then complement with a piece like Raul Ruidiaz that can really take you over the top. Kind of like we did in 2018, of having a really solid core and then adding $6 million Kaku and then promptly spoiling that relationship. But to that point, I think like Struber maybe is selling himself short, both to himself and to the public, on the solid pieces of core we do have right now. Andres Reyes, Frankie Amaya, John Tolkien, Nealis, and Long's, getting older, Edwards. Who knows if we give CCJ another deal, but if we do, like, this is Drew Yearwood. This is a really solid, like, core of a team that could be a really good basis for then earning or making a strong argument to make that big splash for the Rui Diaz type guy to take you over the top. If you can't get that core in place first or demonstrate that it's there first, I'm not chomping at the bit or champing at the bit to throw all, Ezekiel Barco and all these other guys at you just to get a couple headlines and win the battle of the headlines, So, yeah, I would love for us to embrace, or for Struber to embrace the core that he has and try to foster that. Because, despite as down as we've been, there is actually a solid foundation in this squad, I think.
Is he setting himself short, or is he managing expectations, though?
I don't know. I don't want to try to psychologize.
The managing of expectations, though, you can still do that in a positive way.
Oh, no, I meant that in a totally, nefarious,
That's a good point. No, I think it's true.
Corporate workplace kind of way, where you're like, oh, yeah, I'm up to my neck in, issues, but it's just oh, you could just get this paper done in 2 days, but it makes it seem much more impressive.
Yeah, exactly. But even if Struber, if the worst assumptions can be made that he's kind of just looking out for his, next move that's going to be happening in months or a year.
I guess, to me, all I'm saying to the listener is that Struber has probably lost a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in general, to me, for these types of situations based on the evidence that I have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's just that you could take these results and spin them in a really positive way, and it takes very little effort.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of toxic.
Just call it a project. Right. If you don't have the exact team that you want to have in this moment, you can just say that we're building to something and that there's a lot of promise, and
we have good pieces.
Uplift your players in ways that managers that we've admired have done in the past 5-6 years at this club.
Yeah, and it's also because again, to the early subs point, it's so often he doesn't even trust guys to get 85 or 90 minutes to try to do that. It's well, I already don't trust you, so I'm going to pull you at 55 minutes. Where it's okay, so the everyone's just on a knife's edge the whole time. It's I would be a lot more sympathetic if he was playing these guys he's skeptical of for most of these matches, and then we were seeing them kind of fall short and seeing the limitations more. But he's just the micromanaging, the yanking him around does not lend itself to me getting that same impression as he is. But we have 2 questions that I think would be a good way to wrap up this.
Ooh.
Do we not want to let the folks at home give them a scouting report on FC Barcelona?
I actually finally do. I do know less about them than.
Did you sell your tickets, Beaches?
Not yet, but I'm kind of holding. I've gotten a few DMs on various platforms, so I'm pretty hopeful. Maybe real late last minute, someone's gonna pull the trigger on these really overpriced tickets.
Wow.
But I will say, if I were at the press conference today for Barcelona, I would have asked Struber, how are you going to handle the likes of, dangerous players like Robert Lewandowski and Serginho Dest? Because I'm really curious about how he's going to handle it.
Is Dest still there?
But I thought Lewandowski kind of threw me off because I thought you were going to make just a joke about just some of the other just kind of pedestrian kind
Barcelona
of B-level guys who Barcelona has.
I mean, how is he going to put up with the likes of Ousmane Dembele?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of I don't know. I mean, just to kind of my own spiel about it is just, there's a press conference. I had to work. My cough day job was in the way, but there was big media availability for Barca at the stadium today, and I'm just kind of I don't know, man. Even if it wasn't Barcelona at their lowest ebb in my lifetime, just I don't know, man. I don't really give a shit about any of those guys.
I lied. I would change my question to ask Xavi, how are you going to deal with the likes of Lewis Morgan and Luquinha?
Just in an aesthetic way. I've just never really been into Barca. I've never really fine. Yeah, he has all the trophies and all the respect and everything, but Xavi's never really done it for me.
I've never liked his hair.
I would ask him a series of questions that slowly reveal that I think he's I've confused him with Xabi Alonso, and I don't know who Xabi is.
Oh, I thought you would have redder hair than or redder beard than.
I just like read out a question in really clumsy Basque. Like, what? I don't even know if Xabi Alonso speaks Basque, but it's not the biggest concern in the world. It's a little embarrassing though. How they're pulling out.
We do have a real game on
this.
Tuesday though, I guess. But before that, we have questions.
I guess the only thing I'll say about Barcelona as well is that it's frustrating that league-wide it felt like there were a couple years where all of these friendlies were kind of trending out. Even before COVID, there was like a year or two where we didn't really have them. Everyone seemed to tacitly, independently acknowledge that like they weren't that interesting anymore. It was kind of just like whatever. And now they're back, and people are like getting actually kind of full-throated like takes about them, about like the results and stuff, and it's just like, man, real collective amnesia there, where like all of a sudden people are real heated about it again. It's
Everton
like, guys,
are clearly getting relegated because they lost to Nashville or whatever.
Minnesota.
I mean, that might happen anyway, but like, we do have questions though. They cover similar ground, but I think it is good and always a productive exercise to meet the questions in the framework that they present them. It's also helpful for us to see how people present the way that they're talking about the team. Always enjoy that. It's been a while since we've actually even solicited questions, so I might as well do that here as well, because I do enjoy getting them, even if I forget to check them. So you can always email us at contact@viewfrom202, as well as just mentioning us on Twitter, really. Maybe I'll do a better job of setting up tweets to solicit them, but even if we don't do that, if you ever just want to mention us on Twitter out of the blue, by all means, that's always welcome.
There's also a contact form on our website.
That's true, yes, which also sends it to our email inbox.
But hit us up on Twitter. We all check it at one point or another during the day.
Twitter's more foolproof, to be honest.
Find my Discord and just DM me. That's fine.
Like your individual Discord?
Yeah.
Are you just trying to get people to look at your ticket, sell your ticket again?
Maybe. 6866 the Tang Ping.
You can find me on the Yo app. Send me 3 Yos in a row, and I'll know what that means. So the first question, I think, was submitted through the website, maybe. From the artist known as Blobman2000. And they say, the only positive thing Struber stated was the game was, quote, good for development, unquote, for the young team. Hold on a moment. Don't we have New York 2 for development? Should we really be using that type of excuse for the first team? The whole notion of our team being young and thus needing development is fallacy. Am I wrong for saying this? Is it bad to shoot down that ideology? I want to win. It's been almost 3 decades without a major trophy. For Struber to fall on the notion of rebuilding and development bothers me, as it's a similar copy-paste story from years prior. Thanks. Well, Blobman, first off, I'll say we have 3 major trophies in the last decade. Just a correction there. But point stands, I suppose, in general. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that Zav, friend of the show, made a really good point on Eric Friedlander's space after the game on Twitter. That, like, our team are guys who've played 100, 200 games in their careers. Like, players start from when they're 16. If you're a 22-year-old player, you've already played for 6 years. Just saying that a 23, 24-year-old, like, around 24 average team is like a non-veteran team at this point in this kind of like industrialized soccer world is also absurd. Like, we have to be resetting our or recalibrating what our expectations are of these dudes because these are full-grown professionals. This is a first-tier team, and yeah, you're right. It sounds like a weak excuse. Like, we are an MLS team, we should be performing at an MLS level, and we have MLS, if not better than MLS level players. So I agree. It just kind of sounds like a weak excuse.
Yeah, I agree.
I think if it were framed around either ownership of the result or other ways in which he described his players that were not in this kind of like needling, like, counterproductive way, I could see that being like a decent like I guess response, right? But if that's the only positive, then I think that part itself is the most unacceptable part.
Right,
I have less of an
especially-
issue with the development as like a concept. It's more about like how it was framed in the press conference.
Yeah, especially because it's framed as though it's like this permanent problem when like youth is maybe literally the only problem that solves itself in time, right?
It comes off as like, yeah, it definitely comes off as sarcastic or passive aggressive or something, right? Because, I mean, even thinking back to the first year Struber was here, he used to be so much better about being like, my boys are hungry for their first win. They are ready to take the next step forward. And, like, a cup semifinal where we've played pretty well the whole cup run would be, like, a good time to be like, oh, I'm disappointed. I think this team is hungry. Like, my boys, like, they're not perfect, but we can... And that would be in line with other things he's said. For him to suddenly say this is... Or not suddenly, but for him to say... The development thing does feel like backhanded as hell and ridiculous.
I mean, first off, it sounds like that Eric Friedlander Spaces thing was like Paris in the 20s for like RBNY.
It was like the
Twitter.
Academy, yeah, for sure.
It's like the biggest moment since like Do on a Tuesday. But anyway, thanks Eric for that because it sounded like a lot of like cool stuff happened.
Sam, you were there, right?
I was there. It was like how many people were there? Like 100?
Yeah, like 120.
123 or
yeah.
something at the peak.
It was a lot of good discourse too. It wasn't like everyone was saying the same thing either. Like people were coming in here being like, "Hey, these are maybe our issues," and people were like arguing, but it was very respectful and like people were listening. And I think we've all come to like shape our arguments around that level of respect, where we're like, "Oh, actually, when we break down all our arguments, they do." Go to one person who like is in charge of all of it.
It was titled as a venting session, and I think it was exactly that. But it was also really productive too. Like it was interesting to hear everybody's opinions too. So yeah, a long way of saying thank you. Thank you to Eric
big
for
props to
setting that up.
Eric. Yeah, we stand Eric on this podcast.
But yeah, getting back to the question, I think the development thing, like you were kind of saying a minute ago, Brit, it felt like the team had the learnings moments. Through all of last year, the last year was when the team, was kind of struggling for a little bit during the summer, and then sort of spent a few months grinding it out and recovering the season. And it just kind of brings back the theme that we've had throughout the episode of just kind of like, I don't know. I feel like the shelf life has kind of passed for Struber to keep saying that this team is in flux, this team is unfinished or whatever, especially considering his whole selling point, his whole resume when he came here was that he's Mr. Red Bull #1 youth developer guy. For him to still have this many issues getting across to his players, year and a half, 2 years in, what have you, is just not good enough. It's not a positive kind of face to show of where the project is, if you're calling it a project.
It also doesn't feel very believable that this was actually good for development to get smacked around like this, and be told that you're fucking everything up anyway.
But also, yeah, like you mentioned the phrase "learnings moments," but when do we apply those? Like, we've had so many of these moments. When are they going to be applied?
Yeah. Second question on Twitter from Nathan Howard is, I think Struber's misunderstood by the average fan in ways that help explain some of his puzzling decisions, but I have a creeping anxiety that this quirkiness isn't the Austrian soccer shamanism I thought it was. Time for a zone, in quotes, style framework to understand this phenomenon? Well, Nathan, careful what you ask for here. I certainly have thoughts about this, although I definitely have a lot of, like, what I would say metatextual framing thoughts about this for, like, the way that we've discussed the zone in the past and everything. But I guess I think we've broached it on a couple episodes about the zone. For newer listeners, the zone was kind of the thing we started referring to in the Armis era, 2019, 2020. Definitely overlapped with just general COVID malaise as the sporting world ground to a halt. But I think the most important thing in hindsight about the zone is this feeling that results were sort of detached from any sort of consequences. Because there are a lot of different smaller things that we like referred to as zone, but really that's just the main thing I want to drill down, that the results and consequences seem to be off. Now, Armis and Struber are very different in a lot of ways, but I think that like basic part of it is somewhat true here. I still have been hesitant to say zone again because I don't just want to call everything zone. But I think we've hit on a couple points in this episode that are familiar to us, which is one, like the question of like when is now? Like when are we actually going to try to move forward? Is it always a perpetual someday in the future, you know, like an owner will buy us all the shiny toys and everything will be perfect, or someday in the future like our luck will change? Or and then there's also the question of like what you know framework is in place at the club, who is the person in charge of hiring and firing the manager of Red Bull New York. Because I think that was the part of the zone that was really quite most demoralizing for us, was the feeling that there was actually nobody there. There was no there at the club to actually have any sort of sense to analyze or evaluate the coaching staff and the sporting department against what was actually going on. And with the recent turnover in the head of sports situation, I admit that I am nervous about that again. We do have a new head of sport. It wasn't just left unfilled like it was when it was just sort of Hamlet and Armis around. But we don't know much about Schneider. Apparently, we might learn him a little bit more soon. But signs, I think, have pointed to Gerhard Struber having a little bit more influence and just like autonomy within the setup on like transfer decisions and what he wants to do, which also makes it seem like we might be back in a situation where there might not be someone at Red Bull New York or Red Bull anywhere to sort of pump the brakes and say like, how is this project going? Which is the part that worries me. I don't know whether or not we should call that a zone or not. I don't know if we're at the point where all of the results just sort of feel meaningless. I think they still do have meaning, as evidenced by the last 3 matches being quite the wake-up call, I think, for how this season is going. So, I don't know.
So I feel like, yes, we're not in the same kind of framework that the last zone was, but I also think we are kind of closer, and Cork is the one who said this first, I think maybe, or alluded to it, that we're closer to the original framework of the Klinsmann zone than we are what eventually became the Armis zone. Because I think, honestly, what happened is that Chris Armis is actually a very large personality and can, it has his own entity there of things that he devoured. But I think we're seeing a lot more of those parallels to kind of like the Jurgen Klinsmann, like throwing players under the bus for things that don't make sense, and like they're not being kind of like things that make it seems more transient of a career path. Like Armis, I felt permanent in a way. Like
kind of framing your work as something that needs to be displayed to many other people besides the fans of the team.
Right. It's really esoteric. You guys just don't get it because I'm continental.
Right.
Yeah.
Except that Struber doesn't even have a illustrious playing career or has one, like with Bayern Munich or Germany or anything.
Right.
So.
Or coached a team to third place in the World Cup, even accidentally.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a good point. That's another contrast that I've forgotten, that the Armis situation ended up sort of, I think, being a proxy for like the soul of the club a bit, because Armis was such like a, local guy. Like he was coaching college soccer before he was plucked out of, by Jesse Marsh to come along. He like had the local accent. He's a very friendly guy that everyone liked interpersonally. Just felt
easy pastory.
Yeah, just very like easy to relate to, I think, in a lot of ways, as just being like a New York guy. And I think as things soured and kind of got stuck in the mud a little bit with his tenure, there was sort of the aspect, I think, that was more intuitive for people to lean into, which like, Struber is kind of, Armis is just doing the best he can with like this like absentee ownership group of like, like, what do you expect out of him? He's trying his best. Like, no one could do better than this. And like, I think that lent itself to him being sort of a stand-in for that kind of way of approaching the club. Mm-hmm. Struber is like could not be more opposite. He's like Red Bull boy number one. He's the biggest Red Bull boy. He's like Dietrich Mateschitz paid £2 million or $2 million to get him over here, and he like is coached at Liefering. He's like earned a lot of his badges through the Red Bull thing. He is like the Red Bull guy. We've brought in another Red Bull or the German guy to be head of sport to kind of do Red Bull things. He does Red Bull related tactics of pressing. A lot of people.
He literally advertises the drink more than any other.
He wears fucking AlphaTauri head to toe every single time. He is the Red Bull guy. He is the Red Bull. So, but yeah, like we're seeing a bit of a repeat of like that dynamic of like, oh, like I don't know what you could expect out of him because like he just like with this ownership group, like which is crazy to me because he's the Red Bull boy.
If there's anybody, who literally embodies what the ownership, capital T, capital O, wants, it's him.
Right.
So there's no way that if there's miscommunication between Austria and Gerhard Struber, who is going to be in touch with what Austria expects or wants.
And I went on a spiel about this last episode, which was that saying, that criticizing Struber is criticizing Red Bull. You should think of him as one of our biggest transfers in the last 2 years, because he was.
He is the avatar for Red Bull.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then I think a key part is also the question of like who fires and hires the manager, because like I think the issue is that there is actually not as much of a middle layer between Struber, the coach of Red Bull, and like whatever Red Bull Global is. Like I think most people like to think that there is some sort of office. There's some sort of people who are Red Bull Soccer who like have a desk somewhere.
Yeah, and sit in a cave somewhere with a giant whiteboard, plotting everything
and either
out.
They like
shadows of X's nose on the
right
walls.
Like either they're like geniuses and they like have figured it out, or they're like saying yes, we're not going to buy anything, like starve them all. And like the harsh reality seems to be that they don't exist. There's no one there. It's just like that's the frustrating part, which I think is like a huge problem or like frustration of mine with Red Bull, is that missing part seems to be killer. Like
especially
I don't really
since Ragnick left the picture.
Yeah, what the big part of the Eric Friedlander space is, not to bring it up again, is that Fernando Gonzalez said this exact same thing. And he's like, if he's the guy who's criticizing like Red Bull as an organization.
Well, I've argued with Fernando a lot in the Armas days about this
very thing that we're talking about.
Because like that was a big thing that we had a reckoning about in 2019-ish, was does this middle layer exist? I wish it did, because like there are some things that the club has historically done and that Red Bull seems to have historically done that were pretty sound, but the continuity, the sort of focus, institutional memory part does not seem to be there, better or for worse.
Right. I mean, like I was just saying, Ragnick left the picture, about 2 years ago now, and kind of like what was happening in a microcosm in New York during the zone, was that they just literally weren't hiring anybody to fill these leadership gaps. I mean, Ragnick left, and Red Bull Soccer, whatever you want to, like we were just saying, envision that as, was basically just Oliver Mintzlaff, who is more or less a business guy as opposed to a technical soccer expert. Just sort of, signing off on whatever was put in front of his desk by these outposts here and there. In our case, Dennis Hamlet, Kevin Thelwell, whoever. And there was basically nobody at the wheel, like you were saying, Brit, sort of plotting out what the soccer strategy is going to be, until they supposedly have tapped up Mario Gomez earlier this year. But again, he's a guy who, obviously legendary player and all that kind of stuff, but has no real track record or experience as an executive or coach or anything. And it's just, and obviously he's going to be either deferential to the existing Red Bull structure, or just kind of buddy with, whoever is, kind of higher up in that structure, which in this case, Struber, you would think kind of is. And yeah, is there actually any sort of clear-minded observer who would ever blow the whistle on anything Struber is, struggling with here? If the project goes downhill here, is anybody going to have any stake in the situation to call it off? It doesn't seem like that sort of figure exists in New York right now. And I think that was part of our attachment to Kevin Thelwell, which is, obviously in a taste kind of way, we liked a lot of what we heard from Kevin Thelwell and thought he just seemed to be generally a stand-up guy who, did a good job steering the club out of the malaise of the Armas era. But also, yeah, he was finally a sort of, figure who was in place to, decide who fires and hires the manager at Red Bull New York, who decides whether Red Bull New York is going well or not, and now that that's out of the picture and Struber appears to have kind of set up his own kind of Jesse Marsh and Dennis Hamlet situation, I think it leaves the club in a very precarious situation to, yes, enter another zone again, to kind of bring Nathan's question full circle.
Yeah.
Should the Struber situation either go completely downhill, or more likely that Struber just leaves for a new job at some point soon.
Yeah, especially because the timeline right before this, right? It was just like, hey, 2015 through 2018, we're able to like kind of develop these underlying assumptions about what can make us a like consistently top level club in MLS by like this kind of global structure of playing the same way head to toe throughout our club. And that like next man up will be plug and play and will succeed for years on end. And that hypothesis was proven false when Armas was in charge, because we did not succeed. And then I think we looked at Kevin Thelwell, right, as kind of like our ticket off of Mr. Bones' wild ride of like this Red Bull like creation that we've kind of like now lost a bit of faith in. Mm-hmm. But now we're like back on the ride without kind of I don't know, any really upside necessarily, or like alternate, like not kind of like a plan B for like game to game strategy, but like a plan B of like, oh, how are we going to proceed from now? It's a very curious question, because like we're saying, like Struber is kind of like the culmination of what Red Bull is supposed to be, or like what they're doing, but like what's the step after that? If he doesn't succeed, then this whole like thing has failed.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like Struber's in some senses in an enviable position, because it's like when you start a new job or any job and you walk in and like everyone is just so thrilled when you like write a basic email and they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Like you find out the prevailing attitude is like, oh, everything here sucks. Like if you do a bad job, that's okay. Everything here sucks, so that's normal. And then maybe you just start doing a shitty job because you're like, well, everyone thinks everything sucks anyway. So like I can always just safely appeal to that impulse everyone has. But
you're living up to the sucking.
I remember things not sucking, and I liked it. And I've seen recently things don't usually suck. Like a lot of parts of the season, a lot of parts of Wednesday didn't suck. The first 44 minutes, pretty dope. But I do think, Struber, one way or the other, I think seems to have convinced himself or gotten the idea that if we lose, it's not ultimately on him, that he has some sort of way of explaining it or explaining it to people. Frustrating situation, zone-esque, but that's, I feel like, a good way to sum up how we feel about the New York Red Bulls right now.
This is true. This is a good time to mention that we're actually pivoting sports as a podcast. Oh, now that we've successfully experienced auto racing as a group.
That's true. I might protest at that, having come in last place both times.
Caused a red flag in the first race, actually.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Well, it didn't make everyone go back to the pits, but everything. But my
they stopped the whole
my accelerator broke.
He broke his car,
or the spring came off my accelerator, so I could only go full speed.
It was probably from when I T-boned the shit out of you on that.
Yeah, well, I did spin out. Actually, I would like to think that it happened before, but
Fernando Gonzalez is obviously the fastest Bill
that's
Carter.
the main reason, actually, is that we can't have another podcast win
Be faster,
our sport. Like, at least with well, I guess the Golden Boot for the GeoGuessr seasons has gone to Pat twice in a row, right?
This is why we're giving up on soccer.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have done our best. I've scored 1 goal each season, guys. So let's go. Let's I've tried the Serge and Goma technique of just hitting at his hands.
Really, I only bring this up because Cork made up like 2 seconds on his lap time.
Hey, I made up 2 seconds on my lap time. I mean, the first one was really bad.
Yeah, but you got a podium.
Yeah.
Did you guys get memberships or just the day?
The membership thing was broken. I don't know, but like I had one. So.
Yeah, I couldn't get it. So, but
we'll probably end up there after a game at some point.
That's true. We didn't see any Red Bulls personnel at it this time, but
I wouldn't mind figuring out who is the fastest podcast on Red Bull's dollar if they wanted to sponsor that.
Next time I'm just gonna like sauna it up and lose 40 pounds of water weight. And pass out and die.
Yeah. I would compete against the Laid Out podcast.
I wouldn't. Laid easily has a weight advantage on all of us. Only if he had ballast to his cart. Come on. Any other thoughts? I cannot tell you when we're going to record next because Tuesday is an infuriating time to have a match, but I presumably be after that. Anything we could possibly say about Colorado would just be a basically repackaged version of, I think, the pretty comprehensive diagnosis or attempted diagnosis.
This is something the listeners should know about Colorado. They won an MLS Cup in 2010.
Oh, that's neat. I didn't know that. Thank you. Do you like have a list of those kind of facts somewhere? Can I subscribe to that?
I actually went 4 pages deep on Metro Fanatic to find that out.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's good, because you have to go like 6 pages deep into Wikipedia to find that out.
Exactly.
So I'm glad it's a little bit easier. Yeah. All right. Till then, I guess.
¿Sabes?